Welcome to Powerboat Nation TV. Today let's take a look at doing a complete rebuild on a Hardin Gen 7 pump. Complete rebuild is going to include new bearings, new seals, new impeller, new wear plates, really everything that has a chance to wear out inside of the pump. To start, we're going to have to take the pulley off of this, which is going to be a 1/4 inch Allen. That's if you're running the C pump with the Hardin pulley. If you're running the pump that runs the stock Mercury pulley, then you would just start by pulling that off with a puller, being that it's not a bolt-on style, and running a billet pulley like the Hardin is. So once we get all these bolts out, we'll set the pulley aside, and then we'll go and we'll pull the back half of this off, and then we're going to take and press off the mandrel off the front of this. We need the mandrel off so we can actually press out the bearings and get the snap rings and seals out. So we'll just set that aside here. We'll flip this back over. Now we'll pull these 6 screws out that has the rear cap on it. There's a lot of different rear caps on these for Mercury, so yours may look different than this. They use them in a lot of different kinds of applications with different drains and air systems and such. Okay, now that we have all the bolts out of the rear cap, we'll just pull the rear cap aside, see what it was from the stock one, set it aside, pull the old wear plate and gasket off, set those aside. Let's go ahead and pull the O-ring out also. Won't be using it, and set it aside. Now we're going to take and we're going to pull the mandrel off of this. That's going to take it over in the press, and we'll have to put a little bearing cap on it and then press it out. To press it out, normally we'll take a socket head, 3/8, and you thread it into the shaft. That way you won't damage the shaft when you're actually pressing on it. You also can use a puller to do this, to where it'll thread in and it'll actually pull it off. You want to make sure you use one or the other because you don't want to damage the shaft. You good? Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll take our bearing separator here, pull it off, put it around there. Like I said, there's quite a few different ways you can do it. It's just these are the tools we have, so it makes it a little bit easier. Drop that down inside. I use an old head bolt that I cut off so I can kind of press down on that. It doesn't take an awful lot of pressure to get this moving. Now we got the mandrel off, we'll just set it aside. Now we'll go back to the bench and we'll pull this seal out. To get this seal out, the easiest way is take a small screwdriver and then you'll set it between the lip and the edge of the housing and just kind of tap it down inside. That'll start to work it out. You have to do it in a couple of places until you get it broke free enough that you can actually pop out the seal. You don't have to worry too much about damaging the seal because we're going to replace it in the rebuild, but you don't want to really damage the housing. Okay, now we'll just pull the seal off the shaft, and that's going to expose the snap ring that's down inside that actually retains the bearing housing in place. So we'll take our snap ring pliers, we'll reach down inside, pull that up and out. Now we got that snap ring apart. We'll set that aside because we're going to use a new snap ring that comes in the kit. Now we're going to take and we're going to press down on the shaft, which will remove these bearings from the actual pump housing. Just as easy to leave the impeller in it to do it when we do it, because then it's just pull the impeller right back out. Okay, now we're going to put it in the press. I just use a housing that's slightly larger than the bearing so we can press into it. Take and center that up on it. Again, we'll be using the old bolt here. And a little spacer. That's the shaft and the bearings. Be a couple snap rings we have to pull off to get the rest of the bearings out. And take and set this aside for the moment. Okay, now we're going to take and press the bearings off. Got a little bearing press here we'll put these into. Then again, we still got the bolt up on the top here. Okay, there's one. Now that we got the first bearing off, see where the snap ring is. Pull this snap ring off and then get in and pull this snap ring off so we can get the second bearing off. Now that we got the two snap rings off, we'll take and press off the remaining bearing. There's both the bearings off. We'll take a look at the shaft, make sure it looks okay, and it looks just fine, so we'll be able to proceed with our rebuild. Now that we have the shaft out, we're going to go in and get this inner seal out. First we got to take the inner wear plate out of the inside, which sometimes it can be a little sticky, sometimes it falls right out. If it gets a little sticky, you can either use a little pick, reach down and pull it out, or you actually can use your snap ring pliers, reach in, open them up, and grab it and help pull it out. This one's not too bad, so we can just kind of pop it out. There's the old piece there, set that aside. Now the seal, set it down. Normally you can take a screwdriver, set down inside the seal on the lip, pull it back, and we can pop it out with a hammer. There's the old seal. When you take it out, you want to kind of reference which way it was installed. The spring side, which is the seal side, is going to go towards the water side. So it's going to go down in first. Now that we've got that out, we'll just take and kind of inspect the housing, make sure the housing still looks good, everything's clean inside. Yeah, everything's fine with that. Then we're going to put the new seal. We'll take and put a little bit of grease on our seal tool. Then the seals press is going to go onto the tool this way. So that the spring side is actually going to go down in first. And we'll drop it down inside. Put it on the vise. Now the seal's installed. Now that we've got our inner seal installed, we're going to go ahead and we're going to press the new bearings onto the shaft. Bearings will slide down over the shaft. It doesn't matter which way the bearings go on. There's really not a right way or wrong way with it. Let's make sure the shaft's a little bit smooth. We'll take and slide the first bearing on, kind of set it in place just a little bit, and then we'll go to the press and press it on. Always put something soft between the shaft and the press. This bearing presses on all the way, and then we'll take and put the two snap rings on. You do want to make sure when you're pressing these bearings on that you're actually pressing up against the inside of the bearing race. That way it keeps you from damaging the bearing. Now we'll set our snap rings and then press on the next bearing. First snap ring will drop down in place. Make sure it's seated in there. Second snap ring goes on now because we need to stop for the bearing. Second snap ring's in place. Now we're going to take the bearing and we'll press it on until it seats up against the snap ring. Okay, that's it there. Both of our bearings are installed. They roll smoothly. Now it's time to push this back into the housing. Now that we've got our bearings pressed on our shaft, we're going to take and push the shaft back into the housing. We're going to take and put a little bit of grease around here so we can kind of lube the seal up a little bit, give a little more life to it. The flat edge on the shaft is going to go down first into the seal because that's what drives the impeller. So you set it in like that. We're going to take and put it in the press. Okay, we press it in until the bearing seats in place. Now it's right at the edge of the snap ring groove. We'll drop the snap ring back in place and then push the seal in. Drop the snap ring in place, make sure it's good and tight. Now it's installed, that we can go to pushing the seal in. Now it's time to put the lip seal in, which is more of a dust guard than anything else. We'll take, and we pre-greased it up, so we'll lube over the shaft. Take and slide it down over, set it in place. And then we'll take a tool that sits down over the outside of it. You kind of want something that's going to press to the outside. This will take and just pound the seal in place. Now that pops the seal right in place. We're all good there. Doesn't take too much on that. Now we can go ahead and pull this bolt out of the front. We don't need it anymore. We're not pressing anything else on the shaft this time. Now we can go ahead and install the impeller. We'll use Hardin's impeller installer here. Thread one of your stock bolts in. Before we do that, we're going to take and drop the wear plate in. Take and put a little bit of grease on the wear plate so it's got a little bit of lube to the impeller. We'll just drop it down inside. It only goes one way, so you really can't mess that up. Set the puller, the installer up. Thread that bolt back in. Bolts are really just to keep it from trying to spin on you. Take the new impeller, we'll set it in place. We're going to line up the flat with the shaft. Going to spin it in anti-clockwise because that's the rotation of the engine on the pump. Push it down, line it up. And then just push it into place. We'll remove the bolts. Okay, now the impeller's installed. Now let's flip her over. And we got to install the mandrel again for the pulley. Mandrel's got two sizes, small, big size and a large size. The larger size goes down, smaller size goes up. When we're doing this, we're going to want to use a tool that's going to pull the mandrel onto the actual shaft. If you don't, you try to press it in place, it's actually going to damage the bearings because the end of the shaft doesn't stick out of the back of this. So I want to make sure that you use a piece that threads into place and actually pulls the mandrel on. So we'll thread that on, get that set up straight. And then it's just a matter of rotating it down until the mandrel's all the way in place. The mandrel is going to stop, or you're going to want to stop it, that is, when the shaft is even with the end of the mandrel. That's going to put your pulley into the correct location for when you reinstall the pump onto the engine. You won't have any misalignment. Okay, now that that's all the way on, we'll pull our installer off. Set it aside. You can see our shaft is even with our end of our mandrel. Now we'll get back to putting the rear housing back in place. Just push the impeller back down in. The new O-ring we're going to want to take, put some grease on the O-ring. That way it helps to seal it, keep it lubricated, and it just sits down inside the groove. Like that. Now our wear plate goes on. The wear plate only goes on way, so you want to make sure that you check the direction of it, that all the bolt holes line up. Okay, and that's the way that's going to go on. So we'll take a little bit of grease and we'll just put on where the impeller is going to ride on that back side. Helps with that initial startup when you're dry. Set the wear plate down in place. Set the gasket down on. You can use some Permatex number 3 if you want to seal the gasket in place to the housing. Sometimes these housings are really tore up in the back, so it helps to seal it a little bit better. Got our gasket in place. We'll drop our rear cap down on. Get our bolts started in place. These 6 bolts are going to be torqued, you know, to about 6.5 foot-pounds. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really quite a bit on a small bolt. These are only a 6mm bolt. We'll get all 6 of these in place and then tightened up. And at this time, this is really a good time to take and change out these original blue caps that are on here. So you can see on these caps are actually broke, which happens quite often on these applications. From either they get stuck, you're taking them off with a pair of pliers. There's just not a lot of good ways for them. So we'll take and we just pull these blue caps out and we'll set those inside. Hardin Marine now makes these nice little stainless replacements. You can put a screwdriver inside to pop them out. They'll never break. They're never gonna fall out while you're out using them and fill your boat with water. So we'll set those in place, get those locked on. Now, it's just a matter of putting our pulley back in place. That's 4 bolts dropped down in there. And then we'll get these 4 bolts tight. We'll get this thing back in the boat. We'll go enjoy our day on the water. Thanks for watching Powerboat Nation TV.